And thank you, Margaret. Thank you so much for giving us a lovely, warm and beautiful musical welcome to church this morning. I don't know about everybody else, but I just loved it. It was beautiful. Thank you. Well, here I am, all on my lonesome up here on the stage. I feel a bit strange. And what we're going to do today will be a little bit different to what we normally do, simply because we're under restrictions again, which is not very nice, but anyway, at least we're all here and we're well. Last week, when we did that little quiz with John about the songs, do you remember that? Do you all remember that? One of the songs that was Holy, Holy, Holy. And I found that really interesting because that's a theme that I've been working on for today's worship service for quite a few weeks. But I love what John said. It was a song about God's specialness. And that's what we're going to look at today, the specialness of our God and our Father and his Son, the Lord Jesus. Let's just begin this time together this morning with a few words from Psalm 34. Let's set the mood a little bit. Come away from that week that we've just had, whatever it held, the busyness of it or the uncertainty of it or whatever it was. Just come away from that for a while and leave it all behind just for a short time and find a new space. Take a big breath in, a big breath out, and relax and enjoy this time with your Lord and Saviour. Psalm 34 verses 1 to 4 says, I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. My soul will boast in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. Did you get that? Extol the Lord. Boast in the Lord. Glorify the Lord and exalt his name. Now, there are a couple of words in there that we don't use very much in our common day language. The word extol. So I looked it up in the dictionary. You know what that means? To praise highly, to laud, as in L-A-U-D. And the word exalt. Exalt, to elevate in honour and power and character and quality. That's what I want to do today, to extol the Lord and to exalt him. Right here, right now, let's do exactly that as we worship the Lord our God in this way. Thank you.
Saints adore thee, casting down their gold. falling down before thee, which word and art and evermore shall be. Holy, 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 though the darkness hide thee, though the eye of sinful man thy glory may not see, only thou art holy, there is none beside thee, perfect in power, love in purity. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, all thy works shall praise thy name in earth and sky and sea. Holy, 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 merciful and mighty, God in three persons, blessed Trinity. God in three persons, blessed Trinity.
Day and night they never stop saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Whenever the living creatures give glory, honour and thanks to him who sits on the throne and who lives for ever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever. They lay their crowns before the throne and say, You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honour and power, for you created all things, and by your will they are created and have their being. We're going to listen to Majesty now, and remember that passage. The creatures, the people in heaven, the beings in heaven that God has created, worship him all the time, day in and day out. All the time they say he's worthy and he's glorious and he's wonderful. And we'll not sing, unfortunately, but we'll remember the same thing right now too.
Majesty, worship his majesty. Unto Jesus be glory, honor and praise. Majesty, kingdom, authority, flow from his throne unto his own, his anthem raise. So exalt, lift up on high the name of Jesus. Magnify, come glorify Christ Jesus the King. Majesty, worship his majesty. Jesus who died, now glorified, King of all kings. Majesty, worship his majesty. Unto Jesus be all glory, honor and praise. Majesty, kingdom authority flow from his throne unto his own, his anthem raised. So exalt, lift up on high the name of Jesus. Magnify, come glorify Christ Jesus the King. Majesty, worship his majesty. Jesus who died, now glorified, King of all kings. Jesus who died, now glorified, King of all kings.
So exalt, lift up on high the name of Jesus. Magnify and glorify. Magnify. What is to magnify? To magnify is to make it bigger, to see the details and bring it a little closer. Magnify the name of Jesus. See it, make it bigger, see the details, bring it a bit closer. John saw that splendid vision that I read about from Revelation just before we sang. That glimpse into heaven. Imagine it. Imagine it was you standing in John's shoes and in that place that day. All at once, it's jaw-droppingly beautiful and glorious and wonderful, and so awe-inspiring. But it's also a bit strange and a little bit frightening. We tend not to think that God's glory could be frightening. The angel says to John, though, several times in fact, don't be afraid. Around about 800 years before John saw that vision of heaven, the prophet Isaiah had a very similar experience. He also saw. He writes, I saw the Lord. I saw the Lord seated on a throne. I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphs, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling out to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. And again we see the triple use of the word holy, 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 which just serves to underscore and emphasise God's infinite holiness. We're going to hum, listen to Lift Up Your Heads.
Lift up your heads to the coming King. Bow before him and adore him, sing to his majesty. Let your praises be pure and holy, giving glory to the King of Kings. Lift up your heads pure and holy, giving glory to the King of Kings. Pure and holy, giving glory to the King of Kings.
We tend to think, don't we, that it's all just going on in heaven. Heaven just rocks with constant praise and adoration of God and his Son Jesus. But in Psalm 8, David gives us a new perspective on how God brings glory to himself. Verse 1, O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, the Son of Man that you care for him? Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Psalm 104, praise the Lord, O my soul, O my Lord my God, you are very great. You are clothed with splendour and majesty. He wraps himself in light as with a garment. He stretches out the heavens like a tent. He makes the clouds his chariot and rides on the wings of the wind. Beautiful language, beautiful pictures. I love that one. He wraps himself in light. Wonderful. The Psalms go on, that Psalm 104, goes on for 35 verses, declaring the glory of God in his creation. The writer of this song of praise takes as his theme the visible creation and describes it as a radiant robe that on an invisible creator has clothed himself to display his glory. What I'm trying to say is we can see it every day. We don't need to wait until we see it in glory. Every day we can see God's majesty around us. When you think about it, the heavens and outer space, if you like, is probably, never been there. Few people have this week, but I've never been there. It's probably very quiet out there. Impossibly quiet. And yet, here's David again in Psalm 19 saying that the heavens declare the glory of God. The sky proclaim the works of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. It's not like we can't begin to imagine. It's like we can't begin to imagine the glory of heaven, but God shows us a bit of his glory through the wonder of his creation every single day. So we're going to listen to this song now. Every new day your glory unfolds, filling my eyes with treasures untold. The beauty of holiness brings worship anew. My greatest love is you. The beauty of holiness brings worship anew.
Every new day, your glory unfolds, filling my eyes with your treasures untold. The beauty of holiness brings worship anew. My greatest love is you. Every new day, your glory unfolds, filling my eyes with your treasures untold. The beauty of holiness brings worship anew. My greatest love is you. Call me deeper into your grace, the river that flows from the holy place. Wash over me, cleansing me through. My greatest love is you. Every new day, your glory unfolds, filling my eyes with your treasures untold. The beauty of holiness brings worship anew. My greatest love is you. Call me deeper into your grace, the river that flows from the holy place. Wash over me, cleansing me through. My greatest love is you. Call me deeper into your grace, the river that flows from the holy place. Wash over me, cleansing me through. My greatest love, call me deeper into your grace, the river that flows from the holy place. Wash over me, cleansing me through. My greatest love is you. Wash over me, cleansing me through. My greatest love is you.
What did we say right there back at the beginning of the service this morning from Psalm 34? I will extol, my soul will boast. Glorify the Lord with me, let us exalt his name. If only we could have sung those songs. Sorry, we just couldn't. Finally now from Psalm 145. I will exalt you, my God the King. I will praise your name forever and ever. Every day I will praise you and extol your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. His greatness no one can fathom. All you have made will praise you, O Lord. Your saints will extol you. They will tell of the glory of your kingdom and speak of your might, so that all men may know of your mighty acts and the glorious splendour of your kingdom. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures forever. Hallelujah. Hallelujah for that. Let's just pray now. Our great and wonderful and glorious and mighty God and Father, what a privilege it is to know you and to be called a child. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for the glory and the promise of who you are. And I pray, Lord, this morning that the memory of this morning will lift our hearts and our spirits throughout this coming week. as we remember, we're so focused on what's going on here on earth, Lord, but we need to remember that you are in heaven and that we worship and honour you. Lord, there's just so much happening in the world at the moment and in people's lives. I want to pray for these people that we know, Lord, and just quietly, as we each lift up concerns and needs and other people to you quietly, that you will hear our silent prayers over these next few minutes, loving Father. Thank you, Father. We give you all the honour and the praise that's due to your name. And we say thank you. Amen.
God works in mysterious ways. I had a phone call yesterday from Deb Hetherington asking me if I could do the reading today because they're shut in because Bill and the boys been to Orange. And I thought, oh, yeah, I can do that. It's, Genesis chapter 13, righto. I said, it hasn't got any big names or places, has it? She said, no, that's next week. See, I got out of that, didn't I? I've never forgiven John for giving me Matthew chapter 1 once. Right, Genesis chapter 13. Abram and Lot separate. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock, in silver and in gold. From the Negev he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. Then Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, but the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarrelling arose between Abram's herdsmen and the herdsmen of Lot. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were also living in the land at the time. So Abram said to Lot, let's not have any quarrelling between you and me, or between our herdsmen and mine, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Lot looked up and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt towards Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plains and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had departed from him, lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see I will give you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth. So if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you. So Abram moved his tents and went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord.
Andy. How are you doing? Good, good. I'm really appreciative of those who nod their heads so I know what's going on. We're looking again at that passage, and it's one of those stories in the Bible that we learned at Sunday school, isn't it? And I don't know whether you remember those old... Yep, okay, I'll move that around. Is that better? Is that better? Okay. I don't know whether you remember those posters you used to get about this big, and they used to be really beautifully done, and the teacher would stand up the front and go through the story with about 5 or 6 of the pictures. And I always remember Lot looking... the picture of Lot was always this guy with long hair and young and looked really trendy. And of course, this was the 70s. And I'm thinking, oh, Lot was such a cool dude. And then we heard the story and we found out he was a bit of a dipstick. So it's one of those stories, isn't it? We find, and I've always thought, he was a cool dude, but he took his cool dudeness that little bit too far. So we're going to have a look at this. And it's really about Adam and Lot separating, but there's a first bit to it. Like there was last week, there's 2 parts of this chapter, 2 parts to the story. And the first part is where Abraham returns to the land that God had promised to him. And it says, then Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, remember this bit, and Lot with him to the south. Abram was very rich in livestock, silver and in gold. And he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there at first. And there, Abram called on the name of the Lord. Notice it says there, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning. So it's as if he went off on this trip to Egypt, and then God's brought him right back to that first relationship. There's an old song by Andre Crouch which is called Take Me Back. And it's all about going back to that original place of our relationship to God. And this is what this is talking about. What's happened is Abram's done the wrong thing. Remember last week? He lied about Sarai, and he lied and did the wrong thing. And what's happened is God's brought him back to a place that he remembers what his original relationship to God is about. Take me back. Take me back. It's interesting. It's also to the place of the altar which he had made there at first. So what's happened is God has brought him back to a point where Abram knows that he can worship. He's come back to a place where he can relate to God. Remember, Abraham built the altar himself. He built the altar so that he could relate and he could worship and sacrifice to God. Abraham's come right back to the beginning of his relationship with God. How many times in our lives do we have to do that? A lot. There's a great statement in one of Billy Graham's books about recommitting yourself to Jesus every time you wake up. Now, I don't know whether you wake up and that's the first thing you think of. Sorry, my bones and my back don't think that way. My first comment is always, oh, what's going on? But what's your first thing when you wake up? Is it about what am I going to do with you today, God? Or what? Do we recommit ourselves to the Lord's service every day? Part of that story from Billy Graham is that he used to wake up and his first part of his prayer was, Lord, what are we doing together today? What an interesting comment. Do we put ourselves at the basic part of our relationship to God every day? Yeah. Within this story, the next part is interesting because they had so much stuff. there was tensions. There's contention between Abram and Lot's hired workers. It doesn't say that there's contention between Abram and Lot. Now, let's be clear on that. There's not issues between them at this point. But there is issues between their hired workers. Now, warmly, what we would say, it says there between my herdsman and your herdsman, hired workers, are they hired workers or are they slaves? Most probably, they're slaves. They're possessions. He goes on in verse, where are we up to? I'm up to here somewhere. We goes on in verses 5 to 7. Lot also, who went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. Now the land was not able to support them, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in the land. That's a bit bizarre, isn't it? Why does it say that the Perizzites lived there? Why does it say the Canaanites lived there? Well, possibly part of the reason why they couldn't all live together was because there was other people living with them. Years ago, I remember travelling from Hillston back to Griffith, where I lived, and there was there's cattle on the road. And I thought, okay, there's cattle on the road. And then we go through the herd of cattle. There's cattle everywhere feeding on the side of the road, and then 10 k's further along, I think, there's more cattle on the road. And then another 20 kilometres further along the road, there's a whole bunch of sheep on the road. And the reason they were there is because it was the middle of a drought, and these people were trying to get whatever feed they could for their animals. The problem was going to be, as the animals moved down the road, they're going to find out that it had already been eaten out by the ones before. There wasn't enough for each separate herd. Similar thing here. There's Canaanites, there's Perizzites, there's Abraham and Lot. There's not enough room for them. Their possessions were so great. I've never been able to actually say that. But what an amazing thing. They were so successful at what they did. They were so successful at being, well, Abram was a bit of an entrepreneur, wasn't he? He went down to Egypt and came back with more. And Lot must have been a very effective herdsman as well. Let's think about it. The reason that they were having problems and too many livestock is because they were good at what they did. And they were blessed by God as well. But listen to Abram's generosity. And that's the only way that we can put this, really. So Abram said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate for me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right. Or if you go to the right, I will go to the left." Notice this. Is not the whole land before you? And that picture that I remember from Sunday school, you can see in the background all of the hills. Sometimes I go and pray up at Mount Panorama, and I go up over the back and pray, particularly when it's busy and there's a lot of people around. And you just look out over the farms, and it just looks magnificent. And part of my mind sort of says, that's what Locke's looking at. That's what he sees. He said, I want that. I want to live there. And notice it says, if you take the left, then I will go to the right. Abram must have assumed that Lot was a clever young dude. He must have assumed that Abram would get the best for himself. He must have known that there was an element of selfishness in Lot. Yet he still offers. He has the right as the head of the clan to say, you go over there and I'll go here. That's the thing that we don't often get. He has the right to make the decision to take what he wants, and he chooses to let Lot have his choice. Intriguing, isn't it? Intriguing. Lot chooses his portion. What would you do? I mean, really, this lot of land is great. This lot of land over here is okay, but it's not the best. What would you do? Would you say, I want to go where the best stuff is? Would you make the financial and economic logical decision? Or would you think of the well-being of the other person? Or not only the well-being of Lot himself, but the well-being of his people. Lot had created a clan of his own in some ways. He'd been successful. He had wives, he had children, he had slaves. He'd created his own family and his own financial structure. How would we react to that? If we were... Remember that Lot is not Abram's son. It's his nephew. But obviously there's some emotional tie for Abram to be able to say, what do you want? Where do you want to go? And it says this in verse 10. Lot lifted his eyes and saw the plain of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go towards Zoar. Then Lot chose for himself all of the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. But the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. There's an awful lot in this passage, in this little passage here. Like the garden of the Lord. He's referring back to, of course, the concept of the Garden of Eden. In other words, it looked magnificent. It was the place you want to have your herds. It looked great. Lot takes that choice. Lot takes that choice. But there's some other stuff in there. It says there that he pitched his tent as far as Sodom. Now, my assumption is that they knew Sodom and Gomorrah were not the places to be. My assumption is even before other stuff happens, they're aware of the evilness of Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's where he chooses to go. To the cities. He may have thought, okay, I need to be close to a camel run so the kids can go off to school, or I need to be able to sell my produce somewhere. He may have thought through it all logically, but he puts himself in the place of evil. He chose the good land, but there was a consequence to that, isn't there? And one of the things is, if you expose yourself to evil long enough, it affects you. If you expose yourself to things like that long enough and often enough, you become callous to it. In the end, we'll find this out in about chapter 19, what happens is he's moved into town. He's in amongst the people. His daughters are going to marry someone from the town. He's become so calloused to evil that he chooses to live in the middle of it. Our decisions in life have consequences. And we've got to be very, very careful not to make decisions in life based on how good something looks. We need to evaluate what the consequences of that are. We need to be very, very careful in how we do stuff. It's very, very easy to say, "Oh, I like that, let's do this." But we need to be very, very careful. That's what happens. Lot's gone into town, or headed towards town. Abram's, in some ways, got a harder road. Remembering too that the Canaanites and the Perizzites are still around. So there's still this, God's given him this land, but I tend to be competing all the time about everything. Yet, within all of that, God confirms his promise to Abram. Basically what he does is that he promises the land to Abram again and his descendants forever. One of the really cool things I was reading during the week was about, does that mean Lot was now excluded from that promise? No, there's toing and froing academically within that. But Lot has left the presence of Abraham. Does that mean that Lot himself and his people in that are now outside the promise? Keep that in mind, because we need to be careful too. We need to be careful too that we don't step outside of the promises of God for us. That we don't go over here and decide and take the evil road or the road to evil. That we don't step that way, that we don't head that direction. And I suppose all of us think, oh, I don't want that for my kids. I don't want that for my nephews. I don't want them to move away. And we know how many young people from our churches and how many of our own families, the young people drift away. And it hurts. It hurts deep down. And we want to find a way to rescue them, but rescuing Lot comes next week with all of the really big long names, Margaret. I'd kept that for you. But there's some great names, so we'll see how they do that next week. But it is interesting, isn't it? It is interesting. Listen to this. It says in verse 14, "And the Lord said to Abram after Lot had separated from him, 'Lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward and westward. For all the land which you see I give to you and your descendants forever.'" Here's something really interesting. Lot looked down and said, "I like that bit." From the same point, God says, 360, the whole bang lot of it's yours. It's not Lot's. It's not Lot's at all. It's Abraham and his descendants. Abraham and his descendants. And some scholars would say, well, yes, Lot was not one of his descendants, just a relative. So he's excluded. Maybe so. But here's the thing. After Lot had separated him from him, God comes to him to reassure him. To say, that's okay. You're back to where we were. Our relationship's back to where it should be. I'm reinstituting now. He never took the promise away. I'm saying it again so you get it. I'm repeating it to you. And notice what it is. All the land which you see I give to you. Get on the top of a hill and look at everything. Can you imagine how much land that is? Can you imagine the enormity of the promise? The enormity of the promise. Now, Mayo was talking about the specialness of God and the awesomeness of God. Sometimes we don't get that because our brain isn't big enough to take in who God is. But one way that we can see God's enormity is seeing what he gives us. And sometimes we have a small view of God, and what he gives us is a small amount. Yet God wants to bless us, and God wants to bless Abram here, and he says, the whole lot. Whatever you see is what you get. What's he think of God now? Where's his relationship to God going now? He's going, I can't comprehend the whole horizon. How big is this God? Big question, isn't it? How big is our God? What does God promise us? How big is our God? What do we see? God reminds Abram of his promise to give Abram many descendants. Now, this guy's struggling. Him and Sarai have not had children. The story continues for another 6 or 7 chapters within that. Their struggle that they have. Many people today know that struggle. Know that struggle. Look at verse 16. And I'll make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants could also be numbered. That's pretty huge. Another part of Scripture says it's the sand on the ocean, sand on the beach. You see what I'm saying? This is a big picture. Because in those days, there was a lot of dust around. They didn't have paved roads and concrete to get into the tent. What they had was dust. So when you look down, you say that just as much as there's dust here, your descendants will be. But notice what it says. Your descendants. Again, we're going, Lot's missing out here. Lot's made his decision. And it's not about him. The promise of God is to Abram and his people. It's not to someone who's chosen to walk away. It's interesting, isn't it? I love this next part. Abram walks through the land God gave him. Verse 17 and 18. Arise, walking in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you. Then Abram moved his tent and went and dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. I'm just wondering here whether we take some of the directions in Scripture that are in the narrative literally. Is this saying to us, arise and walk in the land through its length and breadth, the land that God's given us responsibility for? How do you react to that? Does that mean we have to walk around our church property? Just be careful, don't do it 6 days in a row and then do it 7 times, and because things might fall in. Oh, it's already happened here. Is that what was happening at the time? You know what I'm saying here? Do we take some of these principles that we get from narratives, and do we put them into life and saying, okay, how does God want us to interpret the way that he asked Abram to understand his blessing? How did he want Abram to understand his blessing? Walk through the land, north to south, east to west, get a concept of its bigness. Does God want us to get a concept of our ministry in this area here or in Bathurst by understanding it, by walking it? One of the things that most of the car drivers do up at the mountain, the day before they race round and round in circles for 1,000 kilometres, is they walk the track. So they understand each aspect of the track, whether there's a weakness in the track here or whether that's a little bit different this year than last year, or there's new surface here or there. They walk the track so they understand it. They do that in speedway racing as well. Before speedway racing, if you actually get there before the races start, apparently, there's some guys walking around in circles. And you're going, what are they doing? Picking up rubbish? No, they're having a look at the track to see what it's about. I know that different times when I've been racing bikes, when I used to go racing velodromes, you'd walk around the track to see whether there were cracks, whether you'd have a look to see what sort of paint the lines were painted on, just in case it was slippery and stuff like that. You become aware of what you were doing. Do we need to become aware of our ministry zones? Do we need to, all together, now wouldn't that be a sight? We walk past the other churches, oh, there go the Baptists, they're being weird. Do we need to become aware of our community? Do we need to walk around it? Do we need to understand its breadth and its depth and its length? Other portions of Scripture indicate that you can claim land. Now, you can claim the land that you walk around. I don't know about that. I don't know where that fits in. But do we take this literally, where it says, arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you? Do we think like that? Do we desire to understand what God has blessed us with? Do we desire to understand the mission field that we have within our local area so well? Now, we understand as Baptists that our mission field is as wide as the whole world. If you want to walk around the whole world, okay, go for it, I'll sponsor you. Okay? But within our own individual context, are we willing to own the ministry field that we have, or the mission field that we have, which is local? Are we willing to get up and walk around it? Notice too, what did he do? Where he went, he built an altar there as well. I said last week, Abram seemed to have this concept of wherever he went, he built an altar, because his concept of worship was movable. Our concept of worship is movable. How do we know that? Because we didn't sing today. We did something different. Our concept of worship is movable. Some people might have raised their hands. Some people might have just thought through the words and worshipped the Lord in silence. That's totally valid. Our worship is movable. It's not dictated by a place, a time. It's not dictated by a format or a style. Wherever you go, build your altar. Wherever you go, find your way of worshipping. Wherever you go. Wherever you go. Just one story to finish with, and I'll use car racing again. Gary Coleman's the V8 supercar chaplain, and he has 45 seconds a year to minister to about 40 million people. 45 seconds he's got to say everything. It takes him longer to prepare that than it does most of his sermons, because he's got to nail it. But one of the things with Gary is, and the reason he's 80-something and not retiring, is it's an amazing point of worship for me. You get that? Do you get that? Because he's praying for safety, and he's praying and helping people. He's worshipping as he prays. Do you get that? So wherever we are, we take, even if we're doing ministry, it's worship. Even if we're doing menial tasks. Up in Armidale, we got some friends, and they owned a cleaning company. And we talked about some of this stuff in her sermon, and one of them came to me afterwards and said, yeah, I was worshipping this week cleaning out the toilets. Absolutely possible. Not a fun job. But see the extremes? Worshipping when you're talking to 40-odd million people, worshipping when you're by yourself and cleaning out the toilets. Wherever you are, you build your altar, you worship the Lord. That's a great concept for us. Let me pray for us. Lord, we thank you and praise you for the way that you care for us, look after us, excuse me, and the way that you also put us in places that we can worship you. Lord, help us this week, wherever we are, wherever we go, whatever we do, to worship you. Help us to have that attitude of worshipping you in spirit and truth wherever we are. Help us to pray without ceasing. Help us to worship in all that we do. And help us, Lord, to be your people in all that we do. In your name, amen.
Well, I wonder what it will be for you this week. That special altar of worship. Wonder what you will find. Wonder what the Lord will show you. Wonder what he will reveal to you. Let's close our service this morning just by singing, I Worship You. Thank you.
I give you all the honor and praise that's due your name, for you are the King of glory, the Creator of all things, and I worship you. I give my life to you. I fall down on my knees, and I worship you. I give my life to you. I fall down on my knees. As your spirit moves upon me now, you meet my deepest need, and I lift my hands up to your throne. Your mercy I've received, and I worship you. I give my life to you. I fall down on my knees, and I worship you. I give my life to you. I fall down on my knees. You have broken chains that bound me. You've set this captive free. I will lift my voice to praise your name for all eternity, and I worship you. I give my life to you. I fall down on my knees, and I worship you. I give my life to you. I fall down on my knees. I worship you.
I hope you all have a lovely week with the Lord this week. Thank you.